Thanks, Jim, for that kind introduction, and pleasure being here, and look forward to the discussion today. Uh, my perspective in medical devices, and especially neurotech or neuromodulation, is based on my experiences as somebody who had actually been on the other side of the table, looking at acquiring companies, then as a company founder and as venture capitalist. So it's a little bit of a unique vantage point, and I'll bring my insights based on those three perspectives. So I have around 15 to 17 slides. I'll go through them pretty quickly. Please feel free to ask questions as I go along. James, is that okay? Because I think it's a small forum. We can actually have an interactive discussion. And I'll introduce a little bit about Trio Ventures and NewXL, then talk about the industry, that what I have seen in the last 20 years. I've been involved with the industry since 2004 onwards. And then talk about, bring a little bit of the venture perspective, what I see as a venture capitalist and how I also have interacted with the venture capitalists as a founder, and then talk about where I see the industry going. So Trio is a medical device focused venture fund that was established in 2018, and it is managed by myself and two of my partners, Brad Vail and Tracy Pappas. Both come from medical device industry. Our focus is really on medical devices or technologies that are targeting $1 billion+ markets. So we are very focused on large markets. We are somewhat stage agnostic with a bend towards a little bit early stage, but we have companies that are commercial, FDA approved, and then we have companies that are just coming out of the accelerator. So really stage agnostic. But one of the big filters for us as an investor is that every company has to have the potential to be a standalone public company or equally attractive to acquirers. So it can't be sort of a product-like company that is only attractive to strategic acquirers. It has to be a standalone IPO-able business. So it is a business that will build up on itself and be able to stand on itself. We work with seasoned, experienced operators. And again, our focus really is to work with stage-appropriate entrepreneurs. So when a company is early stage, most of our leadership comes from R&D side. As we move more towards commercial and clinical, we transition to a leadership that is more appropriate to that stage. And that's, again, something to keep in mind as we talk about when you reach or approach the venture capitalist, what kind of team you're bringing to the table. So these are just some of the examples of the companies that we as Trio team members have been involved in. And you'll recognize some of the names here. I'm sure you've seen ads for Inspire on TV. Again, what you will see is a lot of different therapeutic areas: sleep apnea, cardiovascular, OAB, pain, across all stages. Again, commercial stage companies and really early stage companies coming out of the accelerator. And from a product profile, mostly implantable, but you will see a mix of some wearables and hybrids. So NewSpire is a company that is actually a hybrid, which has an implantable component or an injectable component, along with the external power, along with Noctrix, which is purely a wearable device. Everything else, besides the two companies on the bottom, which are in stealth mode, everything else is implantable. So a little bit about NewXL. Again, NewXL is a platform that we utilize. It's an accelerator that is affiliated closely with the fund. And it really is a platform to allow us to access early stage technologies. The accelerator is actually managed by myself and my partner in the accelerator, Lynn Elliott, who came out of Guidant, cardiac rhythm management. And you will see, again, there was a theme in this industry. In fact, there was a lot of the time that Jim was talking about. Initially, a lot of the expertise actually came out of cardiac rhythm management. And that's what my background is as well. And we evolved to neuromodulation, obviously, because of the market needs and the attractiveness of the opportunities in the space. So it's a fairly lean accelerator. It's two of us. We manage it virtually. We focus on one project at a time. So unlike many accelerators, which look at multiple projects at the same time, we kind of pick one project and then work on that project for 6 to 18 months, try to de-risk that project with very little capital, and then go and raise Series A financing for that company. And we have done 2 startups in the last almost 30 months now, a company called Shiratronics that is going after chronic migraine. And that closed a $36 million Series A financing in March of 2021. I'm mixing up years, maybe March of 2020. And then Avivo Med, which is in stealth mode, they raised $32 million in Series A November of last year. So what makes neurotech exciting? To me, at least as a biomedical engineering, it's the coming together of the biology, the complexity of solving a biological problem along with electronics, and now with the intermingling of AI and data sciences. And that is really what is exciting about this space. And that is what I think is driving a lot of the growth that we are seeing in the industry. So this is a little bit of, I think it's some of the data that Jim already shared. But when you look at the industry, and especially in neuromodulation, and I don't differentiate a whole lot between neuromodulation and bioelectronics the way Jim was, but this industry really has grown, almost doubled every 5 years. Some of it is, again, the core indications like pain and so forth, but new indications coming. And it's actually interesting to see when you look at these numbers here, if there's sequence embedded in here, Inspire this year is going to do $400 million. So these numbers are really starting to grow for other indications and the new indications. Again, the industry has grown up to $8.5 billion. We started investing in this industry as a team in the time around 2022. North Star Neuroscience, in fact, that was one of our first investments in that space. At that time, it was a J&J investment. Ended up not being a great investment, but hopefully, it has led to some science being done in the space of stroke rehab. Neuroplasticity, which is what North Star Neurosciences was chasing, still continues to be a complex science problem. Sorry, I'm going in the other direction. And this is what is drawn. Jim talked quite a bit about the venture money coming into the industry. But this is one of the reasons. I mean, a lot of money has gone in the space, but off late, we have started to see real exits coming out of those investments. So the 4 bars, if you look at this chart, there are 4 bars which are in orange and red colors. Those are 4 companies in the neurotech space, and I'm using neurotech a little bit broadly here, including Penumbra, which is actually in the stroke neurovascular space. 4 out of the top 12 IPOs are in the neuro space. 2 of the top 5 IPOs, best performing IPOs over the last decade, have been in the neuromodulation space. And then if you think about NovoCure, which is really going after a brain tumor with electrical stimulation, then you're talking about 5 out of the top 12 IPOs in the last decade having been IPOs in the neuromed space. So nearly half of the IPOs, and very well performing IPOs. And that is really what is driving interest in the space. I think there was a long time and a lot of money went in, but we didn't have these great outcomes. North Star went public, but that was kind of a bust in some ways. These IPOs have held up pretty well. So these are real businesses now. I am frozen here.
There you go.
Okay, thanks. So this is kind of the med tech industry's evolution. Early 90s, when the industry really started to boom, was primarily driven by surgical devices. And this is kind of the era where J&J really dominated the space. And then we started seeing Guidant, Medtronic, and everybody else coming in with the heart. So cardiac rhythm management and the stents in the cardiovascular business. And heart will always continue. So heart has dominated the market for the last 40 years. That's where most of the venture investments have gone. That's where most of the exits have happened. And heart will continue to be a big part of the venture investment. But we are seeing a big shift towards the brain. And I think that has to do with the fact that the science is finally, we have solved a lot of scientific problems. So it's becoming more predictable when you're looking at solving a problem in the brain, or be it central, be it peripheral. Next 50 to 60 years belong to the brain. Heart will continue to be big. And there are spaces which Jim was referring to, the combination of heart and brain. And we'll talk a little bit about that. There's a lot of spaces like that where, again, we know that the brain controls every single function of the body, including the heart. So how do we manipulate the brain to fix the heart. So we'll see more and more growth in those kinds of spaces. Any questions? All right, this is a Mac. So how has the industry evolved? You know, it's a high growth industry, so it has behaved pretty much like what you would expect in most high growth industries. It's a much larger industry. I mean, obviously there's the big three. There's some consolidation that happened with ANSI, St. Jude, Abbott, and so forth. But beyond the big three, there's actually major players now. Inspire is almost a $6-7 billion market cap company. Exonics, touching $4-5 billion market range, market capital. Nevro, the same way. So there are kind of mid-cap acquirers that are emerging, and I think that is going to make this industry even more exciting. There's a lot of therapeutic diversity. Obviously, we started off neuromodulation primarily with DBS, that moved over to spine, and now we are seeing a lot of peripheral efforts as well. Drug refractory diseases. I mean, a lot of these diseases we are going after now, including heart failure and so forth. These are drug refractory hypertension. So we are seeing devices move into our RA, rheumatoid arthritis, SetPoint Medical. So we are seeing companies going after drug refractory diseases, and these are very big markets. I mean, we have barely scratched the surface with what we have seen in the marketplace today. At least my bias is when I'm looking at neuromod investments to look at diseases that are highly symptomatic, because that's what drives the patient to get a surgery. And that's what we are seeing, that a lot of quality of life impact diseases or therapies coming to market. All this obviously has driven a lot of interest from the venture community. There's on average around $1 billion going from the venture community into neuromodulation. It is slowing down now. We obviously have seen a major impact from MDR on first-in-human studies. Europe was the place where most of us used to go for neuromodulation first-in-human studies, no longer possible. So guess where we are going? Further down south. So it's becoming more and more Australia. There are geographies like Paraguay, Georgia, and others, but neuromod expertise is a little bit different in those settings than cardiovascular. So we know cardiovascular studies you can go and do in a lot of these geographies. Neuromod expertise is still not there in the clinical settings there. And that continues to be a challenge for us. So on the technology trends, again, just like every other industry, we are getting smaller and smaller. It's miniaturizing. We are seeing a movement towards wearables. Now, wearables have drawn a lot of money. And amongst a lot of examples that Jim gave, a lot of wearables. The clinical durability and the application of those still has to prove out. There's very few, and I know CMS is making an attempt to cover some of these devices. And I think wearables have a very important role in the ecosystem, but it really comes down to the case, to the use case. If you're using a wearable that is requiring for a therapy that requires stimulation for more than 4 or 5 hours a day, and for a chronic disease, compliance just won't be there. That is just one of the realities. So I think wearables have a role, and they will play an important role in the market, but it really will come down to the use case. Closed loop systems. Again, as we get more refined on technology and understanding the science better, we're going to see closed loop systems. Again, this is very similar to what we saw in cardiac rhythm management. Everything is closed loop there because we have electrical power inside and we can sense things and we can act on it. I think that trend will continue. But again, I think in neuromodulation, it will be dependent on the use case. Not every therapy needs to be closed loop. Some therapies need to be. Brain-machine interface. I mean, that's obviously has taken a lot of capital. Everybody's aware of Neuralink from Elon Musk. I think there's some progress there, but not a whole lot has changed. There is incremental progress, but I think we are still some while away from ultimately getting to true brain-machine interface. AI. I mean, Jim talked about Nevro AI. We are seeing more AI tools coming in. Obviously, AI has become a lot less expensive and very practical to implement in most of the devices. But we are seeing a lot of use of AI in the diagnostic space for early signaling for neurodegenerative disease. So heart and brain, two other things which I dearly love. And they are, again, it's two very complex systems. A lot of effort went into understanding, and BioControl was a company out of Israel that Medtronic had invested in. More than, I don't know, maybe $500 million had gone into overall understanding the interactions of the heart and the brain. We know the autonomic system works in a certain way and it controls the heart. But how to really fine-tune it to impact the disease state has always been a question mark. We are starting to get better understanding of that. And I think that's why we are starting to see, some positive outcomes. CVRX got FDA approval for heart failure. Cardionomics is another company that is going after acute heart failure. So we are going to see more investments in this space because these are two very big areas and complex systems that, the medical device industry is very interested in. So how do we look at any company or any product or any technology? A lot of it is really about time and money. So, when we talk about all these risks, you can really always filter it down to two things: how much time and how much money will it take to get somewhere, and what that somewhere is. We usually work our way back from what the exit would look like and how much time and money you need to get there. In between are these layers of risk, technical, clinical, regulatory, reimbursement, and all so forth. The upside is really, it's the IPO and M&A that leads to an exit. Impact matters. I mean, it makes me feel really good when I see the Inspire ads and I see how many millions of patients ultimately it will impact. iRhythm patch being used. All those things matter. They do matter, but to my investors, for most of them, ultimately what matters is how much money they put in, how much money they're going to get. That's how I get measured. Impact is a great feeling, but that's not how I get measured. All these details around the risk are relevant, but to my investors, ultimately, it's how much time, money, and what's the return. And that's what drives me ultimately, because that's what drives the ecosystem. So please keep in mind, as you're thinking about any opportunity, any venture, really try to understand what's the time and money equation for getting to a promised land. And this is exactly the reason why scientific discovery is very difficult to find, because that's undeterministic. It's very difficult for us to figure out how much time and how much money will it take to figure out some mechanism. So scientific discovery is very difficult. It's really more product development and engineering and execution that gets funded. Jim, I think I'm stuck again here. Okay, I got it. Thank you. Risk. Obviously, we all look at risk very differently. So, and as an early stage entrepreneur and as a scientist, I always used to think about, once I get to know the mechanism and I can get the engineering behind it, it's done. But honestly, from our perspective as a venture capitalist, really the risk is multiplying, because now you've invested a lot of capital, and then you have to get reimbursement, and then you have to really commercialize a product. And the amount of dollars that go into doing those activities is significantly higher than actually doing some of the earlier activities. So there is a divergence of how the two sides view risk. I don't know how to bridge it, but it's usually get bridged in terms of valuation, because valuation is ultimately a reflection of how much risk I'm willing to take and value something for the reward that I'm going to get. But this is an important sort of perspective, because I think early stage entrepreneurs really want to think about, or think mostly about, up to a clinical stage. What happens beyond that? That's one of the most capital consuming stages for a company. So, just based on my experience in the space across both sides of the table, how's the best way to approach VCs? Obviously, the most important message is have a very clear value proposition. What is it that makes your product or your technology different? Cold calling VCs is tough. I mean, we get a lot of cold calls and it's almost impossible to answer all of those. So it's the best thing to do is access your networks, people whom they would know. It's always much better to get a warmer introduction than a cold call. Very low hit rate with cold calls. And it's true for us as well. When we raise money, if I'm cold calling on my limited partners, my hit rate is very low. I've had some luck, but it's very low hit rate. It's usually the warm connections. Research the venture fund that you are talking to. Understand what kind of risk they're willing to take, what kind of projects they are willing to invest in. And I talked about define your value proposition very clearly. What makes it cheaper, better, faster? Why should they invest in you versus others? And always have a very good sense of dollar and time, because that's what ultimately we all will trickle down to. How much money and how much time will you take to get to a milestone where we believe you can exit? Reimbursement. I mean, it has become a big part of our risk assessment. Even if you're raising Series A, have a viewpoint on what it'll take to get reimbursement. You may not have the reimbursement, but at least have a viewpoint on what you will do in the next 3, 4, 5 years to procure reimbursement. And team and advisors. Again, very relevant from a stage perspective. Window dressing, we see a lot of pitches where it's the same physician on all of those advisory boards. Avoid those. Sometimes they're good. Sometimes they're good to have, but don't have more than one of those. There's a podium guys, but then ultimately, if somebody's on 50 cap tables, we know that person is not able to spend much time with you guys as advisors. So choose your advisors very carefully and make sure they are relevant, not just window dressing. Valuations. This is always the hardest topic. It's actually pretty straightforward. It is a very straightforward. I think if there are other VCs, and you'll hear from other VCs after this panel, I can tell you the bands where most Series A companies will get valued in medical devices today, where most Series B, and when I say Series A and B, I'm implying certain milestones. So if you're a clinical stage company, you'll get valued at certain, irrespective of whether you're addressing $1 billion or $2 billion market, because we cannot really figure it out or fine tune that much, but we know that how much money and time you'll need to get to an exit, and we need a certain return on our investment. So one of the advices is always to talk to other companies that have got funded. Try to get a sense what the comparables are, because the more you know about what your valuation range should be based on other comparable companies, the more helpful and more realistic discussion we can have. Dilution. I mean, I've had so many discussions with so many founders where some of them have been successful and, through grant money and so forth, avoiding dilution. But ultimately in this space, an average implantable device will take more than $100 million to get past FDA. That's just the reality. You cannot get there with grant money, bootstrapping, or just putting it together. You will have to get to institutional capital. On average, around $100 million. So grant money won't do it. You can't bootstrap it. So you will have to get institutional capital. So might as well, think about dilution, because with money will come dilution. I mean, I've been a founder in 2 companies, and I've gone to venture guys raising money, and I know exactly what valuations I'll get, and I'll take in the dilution. I'd rather take the dilution and get the company funded than worry about protecting the dilution, not having the company funded. So but that's just my perspective, is because I've been on both sides of the table, and I think getting a company funded is a lot more important than owning a lot more of the company when it's not progressing. And the reality is, we know that every company is not going to make it. For us, it's a portfolio approach. We have put together a portfolio of 9, 10 companies. We know X percentage will be the real return generators. Some of them will return the money, and then some of them will be losses. So we also have to, when you're talking to the venture guys, remember that's how they are thinking about you're part of a portfolio. And they don't believe that every company is going to make it, but they hope, sure hope. And that's why they're investing in you, because they believe that your company will make it along with you. It's an ecosystem. Again, VCs get a bad rap, and but we all need each other, because you need capital to get ideas to where it can be a product and available to serve the customer needs. And we all have to exist and coexist. And I think, as long as you understand that the VCs have to meet certain financial targets, once they invest in you, they kind of become your partners. And again, there's a whole flavor of venture guys on the planet. So you have to choose your partners carefully, the ones you can get along with, who your values align with. But usually once they invest, we are your partners for long term. And for us, once we invest, we are successful with you, we like to do repeat business all the time. Because again, that's one less risk for us to take on. So this is a long-term relationship that you develop with your venture investors. So Jim asked me to talk a little bit about any of the successes that I've had in the space. He also asked me to talk about disappointments. Obviously, it's tough to put up a name of a company that was a disappointment. Easier to put the name of a company that was a success. So Inspire, I was an early investor in Inspire from Synergy Life Science. That was my last fund. And it was amazing when we were doing Series B. Actually, we proactively or preemptively put a term sheet for Series B. There was really no competition to put money at that company at that point in time. Multiple dead bodies in sleep apnea. I mean, a lot of money had gone into sleep apnea, nothing had come out. This company had some data, not a whole lot of data, but some data with some broken leads from mid-90s. So there was a project within Medtronic that had been just funded right amount, not to die, but never to thrive. And then it was spun out in 2007. And we went in when they were doing their first feasibility study. First few patients came, data didn't look good, but it was trying to tell us what specific patient we should go after. The other big hurdle was, hey, you know what? CPAP works really well. I mean, CPAP is a very effective therapy. It works 98% of the time if you use it. But the usage had been the same since 1960s, in spite of all the stuff that has gone in humidifiers, better masks, all the technology development that has taken place. CPAP usage hasn't changed. It's been the same, 50% patient. And the usage is defined. If you're a compliant patient, if you use it 4 nights a day, 4 nights a week, 5 hours a night, that's 20 hours of sleep. I mean, I don't know how that's a compliant patient when you're getting 20 hours of sleep at best. And that was a compliant patient for CPAP. So the Inspire's value proposition was, hey, it's going to be at least a lot better compliance than the CPAP. And if this works, it's a multi-billion-dollar market. Our biggest concern again was, hey, will the patients tolerate surgery? And I think I mentioned that, one of the big filters for us is that every neuromodulation investment we make, it has to target a very symptomatic disease. Patient has to be driven to be seeking therapy. And that was very true for this. I was talking to one of the physicians during the diligence process. I'm like, I'm a logical guy. I would rather try CPAP. I'd never go to Inspire. And he says, well, think about it this way. You have jet lag. I said, yeah. He says, okay, one day, what do you do? I said, nothing. Kind of try to work it out and so forth. Second day, it takes me 3 days, 4 days to at least overcome the jet lag. He says, but think about it if you have jet lag every day of your life. and anything I'll do will make no difference to it. That's what these patients are. That's why they're so hungry for any therapy. And that's kind of got us over the hump of, will a surgical device be tolerated for sleep apnea? Another good advantage for Inspire was it was managed by a team that had come out of Medtronic and Guidant, so very experienced people in the space. So we felt very comfortable with the team. Mechanism was kind of understood, but not very well established. We knew that if you could move the tongue and open up the airway, air should go in, and that should take care of sleep apnea. But, typically when this hypoglossal nerve is stimulated, basically what you're doing is you're opening up the airway by patient doing this. And that's what the patient does every time you're stimulating. Now, how much will of that be tolerated? And it's all done sub-threshold. So the patients really don't feel it. It takes them a day or two to get used to it. And after that, they're very tolerant of the therapy. And then obviously we had a great, pivotal trial, and the results came out and were published in New England Journal of Medicine. And, from there it was Wall Street's darling now. So an investment, which I can tell you for the first 4 rounds, we struggled getting new investors. Insiders had to keep supporting it. And the last round before IPO was a down round. And that company is $6 billion, and it's really an amazing success. So it's painful. A lot of these investments are long and painful. And this was one of the lucky ones that got out there. So, where do we go from here? It is an exciting time in neuromodulation. I mean, the industry is growing, it's growing fast, it's doubling every year. I think Jim mentioned that in 2027, it'll be $18 billion. And if you see the trajectory of what we have seen in the past, not surprising, we are around $8.5 billion now. So we double in 5 years, so that should be right on those numbers. There is obviously some headwinds. Economic environment is tough. Institutional investors in the venture funds, they're very heavily, public markets have come down. So their asset class or their holdings in public markets are valued a lot less now. As a result, the venture and the private equity portion of their portfolio is disproportionately high. And so that puts a pressure on them not to invest too much into private equity and venture capital. And we are seeing the effects of those. So the early stage funding, I would say, will be tight for the next 3 to 5 years. What we are seeing is, obviously, I'm sure you have seen a lot of direct to consumer marketing. That was another big thing with Inspire we learned. We were always worried that the patient will be actually sitting with the sleep doctor. And unless we really get sleep doctors convinced of Inspire therapy, and sleep doctors are like neurologists, they will never let go of the patient. They will never let go of the patient. What we found was, no, most of our patients were actually they had all tried CPAPs and they were sick of sleep docs. They were just sitting looking for therapies on their own. So that's why the direct to consumer, and that's why I'm sure each one of you has probably seen ads for Inspire. But patient is becoming a big part of our product development and our thinking, because earlier it used to be all about the physician. But as we are getting to more broader sort of consumer-like markets, we will have to keep patient a lot more in the middle of our thinking as we develop products. Wearables, definitely, they're on the upside. But I did talk about the fact that, hey, it's the use case and the durability of results that will ultimately decide success. We have investments in wearables, and I believe those are some of the cases where they'll be very successful. Closed loop systems, again, not every therapy has to be closed loop. It really comes down to what the need is. If there's a need to have a closed loop system, yes, that will always win over an open loop system. But it again has to be need-based. That again goes into the same domain as smarter connected devices. BMI, I think we'll start to see a little bit more success because now we have started to go through some of the basics behind us. So definitely more developments in that space. And then broader therapeutic reach. And I think Jim already covered a lot of multiple therapeutic areas that neuromodulation is targeting now. One thing that I do see now is also that beyond the therapeutic areas, new anatomical targets. So how do we go after existing markets with new anatomical markets? And that's a little bit of science and anatomy at work. And we are starting to see some trends in there. So you're not taking on unknown mechanism risk, but really dealing with more of the anatomical issues. Degenerative neuro diseases, I think there's a whole session on those. Tough diseases for devices to go after. And I know Jim was more optimistic than me in a lot of these diseases being targeted. I think if the science is clear, the venture dollars will follow with medtech. If the science is not clear, what we have learned, and actually I am shy in going in those spaces because it's really a science project. It's really discovery work, and I cannot handicap what discovery will lead to. So I think those disease states will see some developments, but not as rapidly as we think it may be on the science side. All right, with that, I'll wrap up, but thank you, and any questions?
Well, Dr. Jain, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'm going to exercise my prerogative to ask questions first. And then, Jeremy, we have a couple people online who have questions. We'll give them a chance in a minute. But I'm going to ask the first couple of questions. Really enjoyed your talk. Thank you very much. But I want to follow up on a couple of points you made about clinicians. One of the things you just said a moment ago is about following the science, right? So I want to ask you that. How important is it to an investor to understand the mechanism of action? And I wanted you to answer that question compared to, say, the pharmaceutical industry, right? Because there's a lot of pharmaceutical interventions that come out where, they may have an idea of what the mechanism is, but in a lot of cases they just don't, right? So curious, as you answer that question, if you could compare a potential investor in a pharmaceutical intervention vis-a-vis a neurotech.
Sure. So, from a medtech perspective, when I say mechanism of action, I think we have products on the market in neurotech where mechanism is not exactly understood 100% of the time. What I'm referring to is specifically, as long as we know that you do X, Y, Z, and the effect is this, as long as that equation is clear, so that I'm not spending 15 years trying to figure out if I'm doing this or that, will this happen? Then I think that's a fundable project. So it's a little bit different. I won't say it's always that the mechanism of action, and I'll tell you, migraine is another space that we have looked at. Yes, we kind of understand. I mean, we really don't understand. We kind of understand, but we really don't understand.
No, it's an evolving understanding, right? Look at depression, right? When Helen Megaberg started her work, it was, CG25. Well, it turns out it's not so much about CG25. Exactly. It's more about the axons of passage, of which CG25 might be one, but now MF10 looks like that's
another target.
Another target. So there's an evolving, understanding. So what I hear you saying is that not every investor is going to expect that, everything we need to know about a particular mechanism of action is known, but they want to see a path. They want to see that there's science there.
To me, as long as I can see the effect of if I'm stimulating this and I'm getting an effect here, and that's very well understood, and I don't have to go and worry about in the clinics, will that pan out? Then I'm willing to fund that.
All right. Another comment you made about clinicians that I thought was kind of insightful. And it's a lesson, that the industry needs to learn, is that the doctors don't like to lose their patients, right? So the neurologists want to keep their patients. And we've seen this time and time again. Going back to Neurocontrol in 2001, they had a great product, and neurosurgeons, were happy about it, and the neurologists were happy about it, but they didn't own the patient, right? It was the PM&Rs who owned the patient. And, a lot of them were distrustful of because it takes surgery, right? And for one reason or another, they were reluctant to turn their patients over to a surgeon, to the knife, right? You still see those battles going on today between neurology and pain doc, interventional anesthesiology, right? So to follow up on that comment, Do you think that that's an issue that investors care about, that they're attuned to, that they're going to quiz you on if you're an investor to, hey, who is your target clinician? Is there overlap? And are you intruding on someone's space? How important is that consideration to investors?
Yeah, so I think it varies from investor to investor, but I would say most investors in medtech are always looking at referral paths. And neurologists, are there any neurologists here? Okay, good. They are amongst the most conservative of the referring docs. I mean, a cardiologist will refer to interventional cardiologist or to EP a lot more readily than a neurologist does. So yes, I mean, I would say that most investors are definitely attuned into the fact that what is the referral path? How will the patient get to ultimately the surgery or the device? And I think those are definitely parts of the diligence that every investor will do.
Okay, thanks. I've been hugging the questions. Jeremy, do we have questions from the Zoom world? Anyone on Zoom?
Don't see any.
All right, then we'll take a question from Aaron.
Hi, my name is Zeran Benjamin. Today, MST Business Development. Before that, I was the VP R&D of Blue Wind Medical. We had a wearable device along with the implantable. But actually, I would like to ask you about the company across the street, which his name is Nyxoah. Nyxoah is also a company that has a similar indication to Inspire.
Mm-hmm.
And has a wearable device actually displayed here. And I wonder how you see this company's future, given that its wearable device is going to be much more than 4 hours. It's a whole night device.
Yeah. So, again, rather than just picking on a company, I would go to the generic theme from my perspective on how I look at wearables. If it's a chronic disease that requires more than 2 to 3 hours of wearing a device to have the therapy, it's a tougher sell. Having said that, Nyxoah has been successful. They've gone and done 2 IPOs, raised a lot of money. We'll see how the clinical results work out. But imagine sticking something to your neck every day for 8 hours or 6 hours, whatever. So we'll find out. I mean, again, it's my general bias is if you're going to need something which is wearable for more than 2-3 hours, it's usually a tougher sell.
Hi, Jeremy Koff, among other things, senior consulting editor for Neurotech Reports. You showed a slide showing your investments in implantables, or you referred to them as hybrids, but then you made reference to some investments in the wearable space. Are you able to elaborate which wearables? Yeah. That's my first one. Then I have a follow-up.
Sure. So there was one company called Newspera. That's a hybrid. So they have an injectable. It uses midfield powering technology. So that allows you to penetrate fairly deep with external stimulation. That is one of the big issues with external stimulation because most are inductive coupling devices. And this one is actually midfield powering technology. So it allows you to go up to 12, 14 centimeters deep without losing energy. And that is what the differentiator, but you have to wear an outside external stimulator.
But what about pure wearables with no implantable?
Pure wearables, there's a company called Noctrix. There was a company called Noctrix. They are targeting restless leg syndrome. So there you need 15 to 20 minutes of stimulation when you go to sleep for treating restless leg syndrome. And that's a pure wearable.
Okay, we have time for one more question. Anyone here in the room? Mark?
Thank you. So I'm very interested, Inspire, as a lot of us are. One of the things most interesting is their direct to patient marketing that we're hearing a lot of now. Years ago, I was in the spinal cord stim business with Medtronic. And what we always heard with new patients was, how come nobody told me about this 10 years ago? And I know it's come a long way, but that element still exists. So what's your hypothesis as to why so few implantable devices go direct to consumer?
I think it'll change now. After Inspire, it's changing, so can you repeat the last part of your question?
Just just why we're not seeing it more when we still, I mean, if you look at penetration rates of a lot of these neuromod therapies, they still are minuscule relative to the associated
Markets, yeah. Yeah, I mean, again, I think we will see a lot more direct to consumer. Inspire was a test case, and now actually I know that most companies are talking about it. Will Medtronic jump on it? Will J&J jump on it? Will Abbott jump on it? It's difficult for me to say. But I know the startup world where we really have to go and get patients, and we are a lot more aggressive. I think you will see a lot more of that happening.
Can I ask a follow-on? You can hear me, so I'll just yell it out. No, oh, sorry. Sorry, the follow-up question is really I mean, direct to consumer seems to make a lot of sense. When
Yeah.
people are hearing about it, they inquire.
And you see
They
that
learn,
with
right?
diabetes all the time,
Right. Oh,
Yeah.
well, of course, that's more of a,
consumerish.
right. It's a
Yes.
DME type product, so you'd expect that.
Yeah.
A lot of the implants obviously aren't, but in terms of that overall awareness, is the reason to not go directly more to do with the question of who owns the patient and stepping on people's toes?
It's a little bit of that. And I think that's a balancing act every company has to look at where, I'm pretty sure for spinal cord stim, Medtronic knows if they have to squeeze the levers where to go, isn't it? But we at Inspire, I mean, we were looking for patients and we figured out that, hey, it's a lot more effective rather than going and banging on the doors of sleep docs. Let's go do radio ads. And we saw how that did. So I think it just depends on the market. And, same companies when it comes to diabetes, because it's more consumer. Sleep is more consumerish. Sleep is definitely more consumerish. So it does go down to which specific therapeutic area you're talking about. But we will see more of that because I think companies are starting to realize after Inspire's success that, yes, this is a way to go and get your therapy out there in the hands of the patient, or at least let the patient be aware what's out there. So I think we'll see more. I mean, the orthopedic industry did that. They used to send mail-in flyers and all that. Somehow it didn't work out because the patient was still not the primary driver. The patient was going to the physician and physician will tell, I do this. So I think there's a little bit of how each therapeutic area, specifically the patient and the physician interplay.
Okay, we're behind on time, but I think there's one more question. Will, can you hold on a second? Can you make it a quick one?
Last slide, second bullet, which was about getting involved more with the patients and the end user. From a finance perspective, are you taking in consideration more about, or I should say less about safety and efficacy? Sorry, not less about that, but also including demand in the market. So we're seeing or hearing anecdotally about these tranches of funding that are coming in later to include now the demand in the market they're seeing. Is that something that you're, a strategy that you're undertaking as well?
Can you explain demand of the market?
So once that device gets into market, the VCs in the private equity world are releasing additional funds of tranches of funding.
Yeah, I mean, we don't want to invest more than we have to. So if we are investing more, it's just because it's a need to drive revenues. So if you're seeing additional financing because we have to invest to drive revenues. So that's the reason. And it could be, again, a lot of companies are going direct to consumer, and that's expensive. That is expensive. So I don't know if that answered your question, but we can take it offline.
Anyway, again, I want to thank Dr. Jain very much. We appreciate your talk.